when a new concept comes, it comes with 10 different issues which you have to solve for before it can just be like when you smile, your payment goes, right? It's also scary to see if all the other things are not solved. I wouldn't want that to happen, though I would want to, right?
Could you paint a picture of what a utopian, very financially inclusive society actually looks like?
Whoever wants to do a transaction, financial transaction, nobody should ask him, who are you? Prove to me who you are. And if you just smile, you can pay. If you just frown, you say that no, nothing happens.
Hi, I'm Arvind Radhakrishnan. Welcome to Upstart by WeWork Labs, a WeWork India initiative. With Upstart, we want to focus on everything that you want to know about the startup ecosystem from the people you want to hear it from, like my guest today. From her tenure as head of finance at TaxiForSure, where she played a crucial role during its acquisition by Ola, to serving as the CFO of Tapzo and now Open's CFO, Deena Jacob's journey has been nothing short of inspiring. Deena's current role at Open places her at the heart of India's booming Fintech market, which has been growing steadily at a compound annual growth rate of 22% and is on track to reach $1.5 trillion, yes, that's trillion with a T, in total transaction value by 2025. India is the third largest hub for Fintech startups worldwide, and pioneers like Open are leading this advance to prominence, furthering our goals in financial inclusion and social mobility. With Deena at the financial helm of Open, there's no one better to explore this dynamic space with. Deena, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Arvind.
Great to have you here. I'm really excited about our conversation today because this is one of those key pillars. And I want to jump into this, but actually, because of your journey so far, I actually want to take a step back. You've actually had such an interesting career. You started off in the Big Four. You then moved to a research role. Then you moved to consumer products. You've been in consumer services. You also in ride sharing, obviously with Ola, and now you're in financial services. So you very much have this vantage point of the ecosystem at large. So my initial question as I was sort of preparing for this episode was, what role do you see the startup ecosystem playing in the growth of a country, in the growth of India and the Indian startup ecosystem?
It's a great question. In fact, last 20 plus 2 odd decades of my career, starting with Israel, you mentioned starting with the Big Four, and then have been with banks, as you see in banking from the close quarters. Then I've been into research, looking at different sectors across the globe, and finally finding where my heart and soul lies, like where my happiness lies, the startup ecosystem. So when I started off in 2010-11 time, I can't say that startup ecosystem or startup was just the beginning, or rather it was very nascent early stage of probably, Flipkart's early stage was starting around that time. And it wasn't a big buzzword like the way we speak about right now. From there to now, if you look at the entire startup ecosystem, as well as the kind of contribution the startup ecosystem has given to entire nation building, it has been phenomenal. And I can't be more thankful to be in that space and time, seeing it right from where it has been in the baby step, taking the baby steps all the way to, I can't say it is still an adult, but the whole journey of growing up literally, wherein it has played a great role in different sectors, the convenience. So now when I go outside of India, like the way probably a couple of decades back when you go out of India, most of the developed countries, you really go and say, wow, what a convenience. When do we get all of these in India? And today when you go there, you are really like, when can I get back and experience the convenience of India? So it has come to that stage just under a decade. And I would say that startup has played a huge role, particularly started with the consumer side. And today it is moving on to the business side. A whole lot of SaaS companies, again, leading the way for a lot of, convenience and other tech enablement, which is happening all across, not only India. SaaS has always been, like in the last half a decade, if you see, has been success story outside of India. Now you're seeing that coming back into India, which also means that from a curve, from an overall perspective, this is becoming, or rather from a B2B perspective also, it is evolving.
Right.
So startups have played a huge role along with the government, along with the digital public infrastructure, the DPI that the government is bringing in. You can literally see startup ecosystem itself being a public-private partnership right across. And India as a country with a varied culture, varied levels of development, which you can see in different cities, the language that we see, probably the penetration of internet, right from all of this, is slightly challenging landscape to actually get anything completely done within India, particularly from a digital side, adoption, literacy. So that way, if you look at it, startups have been the distribution angle, have been the connector between what are the developments which are happening and taking that in a very innovative manner always to the people. Right. So that's the evolution you have seen in the startup ecosystem. Right. And I'm very proud to see, starting probably 12, 13 years later, looking at how it has evolved, very proud to see where we have reached and the potential of the entire ecosystem, how it can be a partner to the government in taking India to the greatest heights that we are looking at in the next few years, right? I mean, 2047, we have a huge dream that we are dreaming about, and today we can see that very well on track for that.
I really like the characterization of it being the partner to the government, almost like the execution arm on the ground that's making those pain points see a solution. That's really interesting. So after you sort of had this journey and a significant amount of time in the consumer world, you ended up choosing financial services as the as the current one, possibly one of the longer stints as well. What was it? What was it about the financial world that sort of called to you, and what made you want to build a company there?
I think at heart, I'm a finance person. I'm a chartered accountant by profession. Not so much by choice, but yeah, it fascinated me. I was a science person, science stream, switching all over to finance, thinking, wow, this is something very, very different. Let me try it out. Sure. Honestly, I didn't have a clue till the time I joined foundation what exactly I was getting into. Right. But I think that world really did amuse me. And I stayed eventually. That's where initially I had a usual path of whether it's audit, whether it's banking, usual path of the financial, a finance person, what kind of path you can choose. And then there was always something like, I really want to make a difference, or problem solving was always something which interested me a lot. Yeah. And that's how I navigated from there to investment research. There should be no time for you to get bored.
True.
And that's how we started looking at different problems, different areas. And then thankfully, the company which I had been as an investment research person, I was one of the very early, within the first 50 members of the company, saw the growth of the company right from there, supporting this buy-side analyst in Europe, all the way to doing the entire account management, to there are multiple functions, growing the company, getting into the management part of it. So that's where I realized I really love building companies. And that's where right after onwards, and then I had my own entrepreneurial stint and went into startup ecosystem, because I realized this is where you can build things. Whether you do something, you can literally see it right in front of your eyes, whether your decision was right or wrong, whether it impacted in a positive or a negative manner, right? Sure. And that also makes you extremely accountable and always on your toes, always thinking about how you can better, how you can improve. Sure. And the moment you say, I'm not scared of failure, and that's something which always I realized, being in a startup, you really can't be scared of failure, because you are going into uncharted, unknown territories. So it's given. You might succeed, you might fail. But if you don't have the fear of doing that, just go ahead. Yeah. And there is something very unique and nice about it. Because the result, you don't know. You can't predict the result. It can be right, can be wrong. But it's all about the beauty of it is when you go into it, feel that, experience it, and when you look back, if something has changed, you really mean like your time was worth it. Absolutely. Your decision was worth it. And that's what I really loved about the startups. And today with the to your question on all the consumer side, it was exceptionally, like each time I had the privilege, I would say so, of being a part of the in thing at that point in time. So when we looked at 2012 onwards, it was with the ride sharing, when it was the entire, the taxi part of it was mobility, in fact, the nascent stage of mobility and the changes that has happened at that point in time. Very early part of it, right into the issues of, I still remember facing the media cameras of around 20 RTOs coming in asking how can you even do this in our office at that point in time. So there were a whole lot of uncertainties when you build something new that you go through, because the law might not keep up with that. The regulations might not keep up with that. And that's where you literally have to look at what is the purpose? What is the purpose that you have behind? What is it that you're solving for? And does it make sense? Or can you do it by drawing that fine line in terms of balancing it, in terms of not being on the wrong side of the law, yet at the same time you are futuristically readying the entire ecosystem. So that was one great experience, 2.5 years, right from a single branch all the way to 50 to around 2,000 people company. It was a very rapid growth. And we also faced all kind of issues in between. And just a 2.5 year journey, which is very intense, yet at the same time we could look back and say, yes, we made a difference.
Impact, yes.
We made an impact, we made a difference. And then coming to the consumer horizontal super app and how the consumers look at it. What is the convenience you can bring in? What is the problem when the bundling, unbundling concepts, especially when it comes to technology? Then the issues of even going through the habit creation to telling them in terms of how this can create convenience, whether it is, the biggest problem with horizontal part of it is telling to a new user what it does for them. And that positioning part, communicating it to them is not easy for the first mover. Sector creation is absolutely not easy. So doing that is again, a very humbling and different experience. How do you reach out and tell them? Beyond habit creation, it becomes a habit. And people there are you talk to your peers, you understand from communities, different places from where you can understand how it can be done and what it takes to do it. So this is something which I've been a part of. And then coming to financial services, to your question on what makes me do it for 8 years, not a single day of boredom. And it's just, ever evolving, extremely dynamic. And even today, every day when you wake up, there is something new on the regulation, there is something new on the security side, something new on data protection, something new on, how can payments happen from one to the other, something new on inclusion. You always think and breathe about, how you can make it better. And it's a vast, huge sector to solve, not only in India, but globally. And when you look at the Indian scenario also, the way we have made progress right from 2010 onwards, I would say, and accelerating from 2016, the financial services sector and particularly the fintech sector, the changes it has seen and the changes it's sitting on right now, it's phenomenal. And I would say that we are leading the way globally. We can be proud to say that we are leading the way. And probably we are way ahead of various other economies in terms of how money is being moved, how you have access to banking, how you have access to the entire financial inclusion. And of course, about the penetration part, that's a different thing to talk about. But at the same time, the little that we have cracked and ever expanding, that is something which we can really be proud of what we have done.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And I was just thinking as you were speaking, it really, you're talking to a founder when they're talking about things that other people would consider pure chaos, and you're like, oh, I can't wait to get up every day. Thank you. Thanks for that. So just to take a step back, so what we're trying to do with Upstart is we're trying to figure out the role the startup ecosystem plays in the country's growth. So what we do is we've charted out kind of the pillars that we think will lead to India's long-term growth. And in each of them, we want to have sort of meaningful conversations with experts about what we as an ecosystem need to do to actually further that growth. So obviously, this is financial services. And just for everyone listening, could you, just from your vantage point, could you paint a picture of what a utopian, very financially inclusive society actually looks like? What is it that we are aiming for? What is, if everything worked out, what does financial inclusion look like? And why is it something worth striving for?
I'll just start with the fun part of it, what I think from a very different perspective. To me, it's all about whoever wants to do a transaction, financial transaction. Nobody should ask him, who are you? Prove to me who you are. And if you just smile, you can pay If you just frown, you say that no, nothing happens. So if that can be done, that's the most like the utopian way of financial inclusion. Don't ask, don't tell. No literacy, nothing is required for that.
Right.
Where do we get there? And that's what we have to keep on solving for. In between, there are tons of issues to be sorted right now, right from your data privacy to the security, cyber security to financial inclusion when you talk about it, the entire digitization or offline even in terms of say the identity verification, all the way to what are the kind of transaction, the transaction footprint they have, historical or otherwise, to validate whether they can be a part of all part of the system or certain part of the system, what part to access and how they have been behaving, and what again when you talk about the credit, about the insurance, everything. Do you have the entire footprint of a person? We do have cracked to good extent the identity part of it, especially starting with, that's where I mentioned about 2010 onwards, the DPI that we sit on is something to be exceptionally proud of. We should be proud of what we have achieved there. So with a kind of billion plus people, it's not a small feat.
Sure.
So from there, we know who is who. To a very good extent, we know that. And then we have the payments layer, which is where the banking and the access comes into picture.
Sure.
And right from talking about how much of the volume of the, right from the direct benefit transfers which has happened to the UPI numbers, impressive numbers and journey that we have made in the past. And today if you look at it, we're also moving towards this entire thing going into the consent layer, wherein you have the account aggregator and the part wherein we can actually commit it to a common place wherein you can choose to share your data with someone or you can choose to hide it.
Sure.
And that's a huge thing. Like you have the option to do it, but at the same time the biggest thing is that you have the option to pull it from different areas, which means the data which you don't even know about you, you'll be in a position to bring it together and then commit it to someone for a particular reason. So that's very important. And now after all of this, currently, we are also moving into the BBPS and the BBPS 2.0, wherein B2B payments are being taken care of. So if you look at it, the pillars like interoperability, inclusion of everyone, can you verify who is there, and can we actually get them included as to be a part of, being a participant in the ecosystem. All of that one by one is being sorted out, and regulations and even the infrastructure is being built where we can connect and utilize it effectively for the transaction. And now why payments or even transactions, why are we talking about this, right? Where is fintech and where is finance and everything? That is an inevitable part of commerce. And traditionally, historically, commerce have been happening on one side wherein the transactions are happening between the buyer and the seller, but the payment is particularly rooted through the banking or offline cash economy. But today if you see, especially with ONDC coming in and then having payment layer being there, credit layer being there, the entire thing, if you look at it, the entire DPI also and the India stack is enabling a set of ecosystem wherein commerce and finance or money flow is getting together. And that I believe is exactly our thesis has been and where we were working on, because unless these two come together, it's very difficult for us to talk about inclusion, talk about how things should be moving forward, because so long as this is disjoint, you can't figure out for which happened. And particularly going back to how do you validate? Can you allow somebody to participate? For that you have to validate with the historical transactions to see whether they have done something valid or something which is questionable, suspicious, right? So that part of it, when you have that, GST, commerce, everything put together, the entire network put together, very easy to figure out what has been. Like, this is where I mentioned about started with, don't ask, who are you and what have you done? Without even checking that, and imagine a place wherein you scan your face and the technology just pulls from everywhere and tells that, okay, fine, this person, very safe to go through. I mean, think of the way in which now DigiYatra works for us, right? You just look at it and go through till the time we experience that. We just couldn't appreciate how much the life would change with that. And now it's just like that. I mean, imagine if you can be like a breeze, getting into the ecosystem is a breeze and doing transactions is a breeze. And you don't have to have too many systems around. And this is where every kind of technology, whether it is from a regulation side, you have the AAs and the BBPS and the interoperable net banking, which is now getting published, right? So all of that put together, along with the way in which the technology is also helping us in terms of if all of these are coming together, whether from an AI, can you just query and say, these are the set of things which are coming, or rather this is what the transaction, or this is what the history has been, this is what the footprint of this person is, right? And that telling you that from everywhere, pulling it and putting it together. And then a non-tamper kind of like say, coming to the technologies like blockchain, can you actually have transactions at different points wherein you can validate and say, yes, it cannot be tampered and this is the truth that you're looking at. And from a cybersecurity perspective, because these are the biggest blockers currently, even for fraud that's happening. A financial literacy, when you speak about it, it's not only financial literacy, it's also about the real literacy.
Sure.
Not only about finance, right? And then only you can interact with the system. And even with all of this, people are getting defrauded. Cyber crime is increasing. So this is where regulator also, sometimes we always say, is regulation a problem in terms of, I mean, progress? But that's not the case. Most of the time, if you read the regulation, mostly it comes because in the entire ecosystem, they would have seen somewhere loopholes being misused, issues that are happening. So that's where the regulation particularly comes into picture, not to block progress, but the only way in which we can make progress is to keep on solving for the fundamental problem.
Right.
And so that's where newer technologies, ways in which we approach inclusion, all of that should change. And to a good extent, if you look at the wealth part of it, insurance part of it, currently we have made great strides out there.
Sure, absolutely.
So,
Absolutely. Actually, you covered a bit of what I want to talk about in regulation as well. So I'll come back to that. But I completely understand. I completely agree that India's method of sort of unbundling, then layering on consent in different areas of protection, that was the only way to do this at scale. And I think it took a country like India, which has to solve at scale to actually make that happen. We've done a lot, like you said, since 2010. Obviously, since 2016, it's accelerated. We're definitely market leaders in a lot of areas as far as the infrastructure goes. But there are some measures. For example, the RBI, its inclusion index pegs India at about, I think it was 64, and I think by some global measures, it's about 45, versus Singapore and some markets in Western Europe and things like that. So again, from your perspective, you touched upon some of it, literacy and things, but what is the gaps? What should we be looking at more urgently as an ecosystem to actually improve this 45 or 64 to the 78s of Singapore and the others? What are we missing?
When we compare India as an economy with maybe Europe or a Singapore, which already right from the internet penetration, all the way to literacy, all the way to the uniqueness, or even the language that people speak, right, or the economic disparity or parity that one need to look at. All of them are extremely different.
Right.
So in that perspective, I would say India has made. I mean, the index that we are looking at also is an amazing number.
Sure.
Right now. I mean, for the reality check on which we are right now. So internet penetration, if you look at it, right? So maybe 5 years back to now, we have literally jumped by multiples at this point in time. So that is one fundamental part wherein the entire digitization, the entire identity verification, all of that was required for India to get in there. The second part is the literacy. So you're looking at quite a few, rural part of India is way different from at least, tier 1, tier 2 that you talk about. Sure. So that part, to achieve a complete financial inclusion is you have to literally build block by block.
Sure.
Right from solving the fundamental issues of, there are different issues that we grapple with, right from societal to, say, the gender diversity part of it, from a gender perspective, from literacy perspective, from a language perspective. Look at most of the apps or most of the interactions and banking that you look at, most of it would be Hindi, English. And a few other languages, whereas you probably would be looking at 18 plus languages. So how do you solve for that, right? And that's where when I mentioned about the newer technologies, the internet penetration, all all of this is going to make a huge difference.
Sure.
But I would say that particularly with the DBTs and the Jantan accounts, all of that put together, we have made good progress.
Absolutely.
Is that sufficient? It is definitely not. So this is on the consumer side. Now let's look at the MSME side also. So when you look at the MSME or on the business side as well, what's happening is that whether it is right from credit to the banking to a good extent, you can't say somebody is unbanked, particularly from a business perspective at least. Of course, you will have a lot of unbanked from consumer perspective. Right. So it would be a typical very, very long tail rural that would be unbanked, so to speak. But do they have access to credit? For example, it is a lifeline for businesses, MSMEs to grow, Absolutely. MSMEs to make progress. So is that completely inclusive? No. So that was the second wave that we saw also. From 2016-17 onwards, the first fintech wave literally happened in lending.
Correct.
And that continues to.
Right.
But the challenge also has been in many of the newer initiatives, while there has been huge success, we have also seen the flip side. Wherein loopholes were exploited. This is exactly where I mentioned, we have to make progress on how do you look at different data, like disjoint, distributed data, how do you effectively bring it together, and how you're in a position to read that properly.
Sure.
So this is the part, again, crux of financial inclusion. And then when you talk about the agri has never been, like historically there wasn't a great way of looking at, except for a preferred sector. There was nothing much that was being done out there. But today, if you see, there is supply chain, the entire thing on the agri, which is the core of what the economy is still for us, right? So that part has come up quite a bit. So this is all happening in the last 4 to 5 years, if you look at it.
Sure.
And before that, this wasn't the case. So every 5 years, if you look at it, since 2010 to 2020, if you have seen only lending to be the major one and the UPI, the P2P, the consumer UPI part, which has come in very, changed the entire landscape drastically. And then about the lending, today you see various other things in fintech also coming up.
Sure.
Right from, say it is wealth, ultimately it's all about inclusion, it's all about whether you are a participant into it, whether the ecosystem recognizes you, and do you have the complete control on your money, and can you really multiply that?
Absolutely.
So which is where wealth comes. And are you safe? At the end of the day, are you safe also? Yeah. So all these aspects and pillars, if you don't take care, and there are still loopholes in most of this, particularly given the fact that rural, different language, literacy being down, all of this put together, if the index is very high, you might be looking at staring at a huge problem of cybersecurity and the risk also, right? Dissuading them from transacting further. And I know in rural, if you still go, there are people who refuse to actually use debit cards. People who refuse to, we recently did one of the pilot with a very large FMCG company to their retailers who are like, really small retailers who buy from them. And the experiment was more about, can we give them credit through credit cards? But they were so scared of taking it. They're like, no, we prefer paying money. Even if you give me 15-day credit, I don't want to take it. They still have the thing in their mind in terms of, credit card always carries a lot of interest, we have to pay. They don't have the concept of you pay on time, nothing comes through. No, they don't trust. They don't trust. And those are the kind of the realities of getting them into this. They still prefer paying cash. When we're trying to give them, like, you get discounts, you get some kind of, cash back if you pay this, you get a credit period, they're not interested.
Very
so these are the hard facts that we need to realize. And there are so many communities, banking, government, and even the startup ecosystem for that matter, which I mentioned about, inclusion. There are so many people who are working on inclusion, solving for these fundamental problems. They might not be particularly on your face talking about inclusion, but, people who are solving towards it also, all of these fundamental issues, all of them are advancing it in terms of making it ripe enough to get it all out there, and then safely getting them into the inclusion. So we'll be talking a very different number. Arvind, trust me, take my word, another 2 years if you're sitting and chatting. I mean, it's not even next 5 years I wouldn't wait for.
Amazing.
we'll be looking at a very different number.
Done.
And
So
that's
it's
the
easy.
confidence in terms of, whether it is you can attribute at that point in time. Again, we can talk about how
Sure.
startup ecosystem worked on that, how the regulators worked on that, right?
Right.
So it's a
Absolutely.
collaborative effort, and it's beautiful to see how banks contributed. Banks, huge contribution part of it, right? How banks contributed. So the ecosystem, the entire thing is coming together, and it's beautiful to see the collaboration in this aspect for a country like India,
Sure.
with a billion plus population, with the kind of variety that we have and the diversity. It's absolutely not something small. And
It's
we will
incredible.
get there, because the little that we have is rock solid.
Sure.
It's all about expanding, and it's sooner than later.
Sure. Incredible. I'm going to hold you to that, and in 2 years, in season 3, we will do this again.
Yes.
No, so one point that you said about fundamental issues being tackled, I just want to double click on that, because it almost seems like financial inclusion requires players like Open, and on the consumer side also other players, extending that accessibility, those methods, and then on the other side for people to actually accept it, right? So one place where this is interesting is there is sort of I don't want to say vanity metric, but there's the fact that number of bank accounts opened is actually very high as a percentage of population in India. I think it's over 80%, if I'm not wrong, something like that. But then on the other side, a lot of these are inactive. And especially with an issue like gender, a lot of sort of bank accounts opened by women are actually inactive. So on the societal side, what can we actually do to improve that? Has there been methods that have worked? I know that Open is present in over 80% of PIN codes in India. What was it on the other side? How do you actually develop the market there to make them accept solutions like this?
So I would say that communities has played a huge role
Sure.
in activating what
Sure.
has to happen in the right things.
Sure.
And the right messaging, getting them, showing the benefit in the way in which, one among them, if they have experienced what benefit this can bring, then it becomes far easier.
Sure.
And it is not about, sessions being conducted or so. It always helps influencing one among them. So which is where if you look at self-help groups or even look at communities, I'll give you a classic example of when we initially saw a huge adoption from one of the pockets in Gujarat, and one of the particular sector, especially rice trading sector, we saw a quick activity happening, adoption happening very, very quickly. Then we went and actually met them, and was really, it was amazing to understand how one person who experienced the difference it can make in his day-to-day life, went ahead and spread the word in the community, and all of them very quickly adopted. And this can never happen with, just by media reach out, or by, digital marketing, or just by conducting sessions.
Right.
More powerful than anything, make them experience what change it can do in their life. And one among them, try and make them the ambassadors in terms of driving the change. And I think, this is exactly where a nation like us, in terms of the diversity, is the only way in which we can do. And that's exactly where banks always succeeded, especially with the branches. If the presence is there, even now the human touch, how much ever we say in terms of, the digitization, that is still on the top block still.
Sure.
So the moment that comes, and that's where banks, the branches in rural or maybe tier 3 onwards is very critical, because they still look for the human touch and the validation, the credibility, the trust. Maybe another 5 years we'll be talking about very different scenario, but currently it's still digital. Let's accept that fact. I mean, it cannot be 100% digital.
Sure.
So we advocate and are into the digital part of the B2B. But even within that, I would say that India, for a longest time, at least for the next half a decade, would still remain digital. Okay. Post that, things would change a lot, because the newer generation, the way in which they are introduced, the way in which they are being looking at the technology, adopting that. Once they are into the mainstream, things could change drastically.
Sure.
And also it will make progress in terms of the entire, connectivity, internet, all the kind of adoption that's happening. So that will make a change.
Sure.
But currently for the next 5 years, let's talk digital.
Sure.
And that's the only way in which we can change how they look at things, and what are the different things. I mean, what are the different steps in terms of first getting into inclusion, what can they, what all benefits. And now the other thing that we need to be very careful about is we don't have any dearth of schemes, right? From the government to inclusion, we have no dearth of schemes. But let's also accept the fact that this is exactly where we need to still tackle the problem of how it is being exploited. To your point of accounts active, inactive. And we have seen in lending and all, when we look at the inclusion, why to some extent, again, the gender part of it.
Sure.
Even today, banks or even the systems would still ask for if a lady, if a woman's application is coming, somebody else will have to sign, somebody else will have to be a guarantor. Sometimes it fumes. I mean, I fume at it when I see that. But the hard reality is what you rightly mentioned.
Sure.
Probably, are they the real ones who are going in and doing? And there are a lot of exploitation still happening. The societal things that we see around and fume about is not the reality, which all across that we see. So these are the fundamental things which have to still change, I would say. And change starts at, like, are we reactive about what happens around?
Sure.
Are we creatively doing something? Every company, I think, whether it is startup, every company, we should have something at the core of it in terms of whether it is from a gender side, or it is from a economic background side, or it is from even the, geographic side. Are we doing something? Something. I mean, whatever little we can do in a particular area, in a particular area that you're passionate about, just go ahead and do. A little bit everywhere will make a lot of difference. And that's where I still stress upon the community aspect of it.
That's a really nice thought, that regardless of the business model, regardless of the sector, baking in inclusion and thinking about that from day one, that's a really nice way to think about it. Now I'm going to shift gears to Open specifically. So Open has obviously tried to tackle financial inclusion uniquely. It's on the B2B side and focusing initially on small businesses and SMEs. Now obviously it's expanded beyond that. Could you shine light? You did mention this a little bit, but in these, you've called it Open's process as kind of the business, like an operating system for business, right? So in these smaller areas, maybe not in the tier ones and tier twos, could you just give our listeners an idea of what business was like before disruptions like Open, and then what did Open and similar platforms solve for them? So what the change has been and how it sort of, the trickle-down effect of this inclusion has happened, so they get an idea.
Topic close to my heart.
Sure.
So what was it before Open or the similar models, right? Just to mention, what we do is it's a connected finance platform.
Sure.
Wherein if you look at how business was being done earlier, you have, what is business at the end of the day? There is something you are selling, whether it's a service or a product, and somebody who really want to avail that.
Correct.
End of the day, we call them buyer and the seller. So the transaction between a buyer and seller, before that negotiation will be there, inquiry will be there, which is where we have different names that we speak about, all the transactions or communication that go between them, whether it's a PO, PI, you name it, and I'm not getting into the details of it. But it's as simple as between a buyer and seller, what are the communications? Ultimately, you decide to do business with each other. And now you can imagine what all are the kind of communications, whether it's offline, online, on phone, on SMS, on email, on business systems that happens, right? And then ultimately, for that a transaction to be concluded, money has to flow. And that's where the banking system comes into picture. Historically, all of this used to happen different systems. You have to send a PO, it's a different system. You have to send a raise an invoice, different system. You have to account for all of that, different system, which is an accounting system. Banking doesn't speak to any of the systems whatsoever, right? So end of the day, this is a set of transactions, somebody to whom you have dealt with and what money had to flow. And from bank, something net of tax, gross of tax, all of that has flown. You have no clue what has gone out, what has come in. So this has been what business looked like, and whether it's bank or the real cash economy, right? So this is where you don't have, that's where the names like a bank reconciliation, people sitting and figuring out with multiple colors where it has to be, which is a number, and the numbers doesn't match, two numbers similar, you don't know where to apply. Then you have suspense accounts in your accounting system. So this is what business looked like before.
Sure.
And what we did is we connected all these systems, whether it's banking, payments, from after banking, cash and bank is not the only aspect, right? Now the UPI came, payment gateway came, cards came. Imagine all of these complexities got layered in the payments itself. And then you have the compliance, whether it's direct or indirect taxes,
Sure.
which all of these summary transactions will have to go back and sit in there, and you have to pay something to the government. Periodically, you will have to file returns. And then you have the accounting part of it. The sum and substance of all these you have to record somewhere
Sure.
to make sense of it with basic rules.
Wow.
So all of this, imagine you come to a single window. You look at the single dashboard and have all of these connected systems connected with each other. Automatically, the system itself, on the basis of technology, identifies with whom you have dealt, for what amount, what taxes have to be paid for that, and the money flow also is getting enabled on the same interface. You don't have to go back to your different bank accounts. So mostly if you look at it, even a smallest business would have a bare minimum of 2 to 3 bank accounts. Sure. Talk to a banker, they would always talk about this float getting split between banks. That's mainly because of the reconciliation. For inflow, there'll be one bank, outflow, there'll be one bank. If you have different branches, it'll be different.
Sure.
It's all because of you can't identify which transaction, hence, to some extent, to make some sense of it, they segregate that.
Sure.
This is getting completely eliminated by system, by what we have built. So the dream was to give time back to an entrepreneur who shouldn't be grappling with all of these different administrative issues. And they really have to have a complete sight of their cash flow. Sure. So this is one thing which traditionally they were not able to do. Multiple bank accounts. You don't know who has to pay you, whom you have paid. Somebody, when they follow up, if you have put their name in somebody else's, you really don't know what proof to show them. Sure. So all of these issues really hinders a businessman to take care of, like, one, understand what cash flow he sits on, second, to make informed decisions. So these two things is something which we can proudly say that successfully eliminated or solved for a business person. So this is where we started off. Initially, when we started off, always the thought was why it was more for SMEs is that this is a problem which only SMEs have, and rest of them have it all sorted with different systems and different ERPs and banks connecting to it. And later we realized that even the normal sign-ups, we had very large enterprises coming in. That's where we realized, oh my God, I mean, this is not, our assumption that it's solved for everyone is not true.
Sure.
And that's how we started off giving to, like, today we work with large banks, partnering with the banks in terms of powering their internet banking for the business users. And then, you know, the same stack goes and powers that. The same stack goes and powers businesses directly, connecting with 300 plus ERPs on one side. And even the HRMS, you name it, and everything to run your business on a day-to-day basis is in a single platform.
Sure.
So that's what we have done. And what it looked like before is disjoint systems with a headache of not having a sight on your cash flow at all.
Right. And this is largely I mean, just correct me if I'm wrong, but is this largely the scenario you just painted? It's in the formal economy. How different is it in the informal economy? How does a solution and the disruption like Open actually penetrate that, the tier 3, tier 4s?
Right. So the fact that we cater to 80% of the PIN codes in India, almost 12,000 PIN codes out of 19,000, right? 12 to 13,000 we service, also speaks about the fact that it's not only the clean and the formal tier ones, to the point where I'll give you, I mean, what do we mean by formal economy also, right? So I'll just give you an example of a pushcart vendor right in front of our office, ice cream vendor, whom we used to go and meet a lot of, like, right from everybody who does business right from there. So, and he was our customer, or rather he is our customer as well. But the fact is, when we went and spoke to him, can you take a guess on what his monthly transaction would be?
Oh, wow. 30, 40,000?
Yeah, we also assumed so. But the fact is 1.5 lakhs.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So this is where the formal and formal economy and the long tail that we speak about, right? It's technically almost a GST-able turnover that we are talking about, right? They also have the same issue of what is coming in, the cash, the change. So that's where the UBI also made a lot of difference. So they still take it through the bank account. They still need to see whether all of the money has come in, it was successful or not. And they also had the same requirement, right? When it is a simple app and we can tell them, okay, find this interface, it'll tell you whether it's success, failure, what happened, who gave you, all of that tracking, simple, even for your vendors when you are taking it from payment or any kind of reminders, order things that you can actually have the documentation and the management of that, it becomes extremely useful for them too.
Okay.
So it's about, they are the ones who really, if the problem is that you shouldn't be overwhelming them with too many things. But if it's just, you can pay, get paid, and you can manage these three things in your day-to-day life. And that's exactly where last time I mentioned about the horizontal also. Since we have so many things, we should also pick and choose for each segment, each kind of each kind of customer, whether it is from again socio-economic, geographic, the kind of language, everything plays a role there.
Sure.
How do you talk to them? And you can't talk to them one by one, right? And that's where the journeys and the interface, all of that matters a lot, and which is exactly where our partnership with banks also. I would go back to, banking system you cannot ignore. It is the digital India. And that's where distributing through the branches and really the people who are in touch with them for opening an account, introducing them first time to a digital transaction through a net banking. When you are going through them, it becomes a far easier job. So that's exactly how you can reach to the length and breadth of India.
Exactly.
And it might not be, it is not one person's or one company's battle. I think we should hold hands and we should collaborate. And there is, in this entire thing, for a billion population or for a 63 million SMEs that we are speaking about, 63 has been last 3 to 4 years, and today I'm sure we are almost looking at 70, 75, and another 2 years it will be 100 plus. And when we are talking about that kind of businesses, it's not one company, it is not one way of reaching out to them. And you can be the bridge, you can make it easy for them in terms of how do they experience the interface, you need to understand them in terms of, making all these cuts, but how do you distribute? That can also be a very different way in which you can collaborate with regulators, you can collaborate with banks, you can collaborate with, the ecosystem players who are already working alongside and solving some of the parts of their problem. Why do you want to just be alone and solve for it? And that's something which has worked beautifully for us too.
That speaks to your first point about how very legacy institutions, including the government, are partnering with startups to actually make this happen. And that's one way to hit scale. The other way is actually, it's a good segue to my next question, which is the inevitable AI question, right? So you've spoken about how technology is the only way to actually scale this. Even if it remains phygital, there is a technology aspect in terms of translating to other languages and things like that. Now AI and all of emerging tech has sort of been creating waves in all industries, but from your vantage point, can you encapsulate what you feel AI is doing to the financial world, financial services, and where you see that going and how it's enabling financial inclusion, AI and emerging tech specifically?
So from AI, I think both AI and blockchain we touched upon earlier. So AI is going to, it's here to stay in whatever form and shape, right? And particularly with the Gen AI also. If you look at the entire financial, talking about the history, the footprint, finding out all of that, interacting with different systems and throwing it in a common man's query, it is not like think of a situation wherein, especially with AI and Gen AI, the power of computing, the power of the provided all of these ecosystems in their stack kind of, which is bringing together data from different aspects. If it is coming to a central system, processing and getting an output in anyone's language, anyone's ease of with consent to consume that, that's where I think both Gen AI and the AI part of it is going to play a huge role, particularly in financial ecosystem also. And that's where, recently we are it's a very early stage, but we are about to launch something in the banking side, and it is going to be one of the global first as well on the Gen AI part. Of course, there are concerns on data privacy, there are concerns on what it will be used for. So these are the things which we need to actively solve for. That's what I mentioned, fundamentally, when a new concept comes, it comes with 10 different issues which you have to solve for before it can just be like when you smile, your payment goes, right? It's also scary. to see if all the other things are not
Absolutely.
solved. I wouldn't want that to happen, though I would want to, right? So these are the areas where I think innovation, and that's where startups have two roles today, hugely on the technology and how it can be efficiently, effectively leveraged for getting that last lap out.
Sure.
One from the customer experience perspective, and second from all the other technology layer, the newest technology, which can solve for the potential risk and potential issues that could come in between. And the second aspect is the business models. Newer business models or innovative ways of putting things together so that the customer convenience or the user's convenience is enhanced to a next level. So these two are where uniqueness of a startup. Otherwise, it would just be a new company formed or a new entity formed, right? I mean, what's the difference between a startup and a new company for that matter? So it's all about the uniqueness of the problem and the business model or the side that you solve for. And that's exactly where startups will have to play a role, and both, that from a technology side, a blockchain kind of or an AI kind of is going to lead the way, and it is going to make a huge change. For example, we have been talking about language problems, right? So imagine a time wherein instructions can be on voice and in any language. I mean, today you can chat with Gen AI in your own language, right? And beautifully it responds to you. It responds to, I mean, I tried speaking in Malayalam and happily, like we had a happy conversation. So imagine the next level of it coming, and then we would have sorted for these issues of how do they understand what's the instruction, how do they understand what's happening. Anybody can actually consume that in whichever form and shape, and you query the data and whatever you want to understand, because today what's happening is that you have static reports, you have probably dynamic reports that we talk about also is like something which you can configure. But imagine a time wherein you can just ask, can you just give me last top 5 transactions on my credit card last month? Or can you give me the most frequent in the last 1 year? Do we know that? We don't.
No.
If you want to understand today, I have to go back to all my credit card statement, download, figure out. So these are the kind of changes. I mean, imagine that getting applied at scale.
That would be
applied at scale for different data sources, different use cases, and that's exactly where models have to come out. We shouldn't fear that. We should embrace and always keep in mind the fact that this is only going to evolve. Which means it would not be in the same form and shape that we see today. But tomorrow it could be like very different. So how do we create or innovatively start thinking about what are the models which can evolve, how it can emerge into a very different effective problem solving tool. So that's something which we need to actively think about.
I like the idea of a world where I can actually ask my bank how much I'm spending on things like Instamart and Blinkit. I think that would help. You mentioned some of the risks. You mentioned data privacy. There's also other ones like overdependence on AI and on a particular technology, wherever it is. It also seems like this is a wave that's coming and just sort of dwarfing everything in its path in a way. How do we, what reasonable steps can we actually take as a country, as an ecosystem, while we're trying to understand these technologies on one hand? How can we guard against these things like, gender bias? Then there's, data privacy. There's, circumventing consent. There are all of these issues. What reasonable steps can we actually take?
See, one is, I think, regulation-wise, we are fairly protected, I would say. But that being said, I would say that the practices are strong enough there. So this is where, again, there are a whole lot of technology-based cybersecurity aspects or technology-based security, especially when it comes to right from, say, tokenization to various other, even the account aggregator framework as such on the consent to whom you give, whom you don't. And this is exactly where, if you look at the practices also, I think even right from the government to the regulation side, we are also being very aware as a country, whether it is right from the copyright to competition to data privacy, how it is being protected. But that being said, yes, there are a whole lot of data theft happening, the fraud happening, cyber security threats happening, the identity theft happening. I have seen that. I mean, these are some of the issues which is also preventing the financial inclusion or threatening the whole fabric of it, right from the regulation, how it came in. This is where technology, the strength of the technology including something like a blockchain.
Sure.
Drawing attention to that again from a cross-border perspective. The biggest issue is like you are worried about tampering, what happens in between, what happens. I mean, thanks to technology, a lot of the trail can still be looked at. But from validations and from, multiple distributed ledger, for example, right, how those kind of beautiful technologies can be effectively used in preventing some of these underlying risk. So that's something which is a blessing, and we should leverage it more and more. And to that, India and the regulator themselves, right? We were also, Open was a part of the sandbox, RBI sandbox, wherein we got a blessing from the regulator for doing a cross-border based, blockchain-based cross-border solution. So I would say that India, including the Innovation Hub, the RBI, NPCI, incredible job, including the regulation, to look at forward-looking what all can we do in terms of how to redefine the way in which transactions or payments are being conducted. Inclusion is there, or a financial entire landscape, the ecosystem and the monetary systems are being handled. So that is commendable, I would say. And if things are in the right direction, we should ignore the noise around at this point in time, whether this particular decision was right, that particular decision, the regulation is, but in the overall scheme of things, if it is being looked at futuristically by all the stakeholders who matters a lot, right, from government to regulator to banking and other ecosystem to the fintechs or the startups and people who are thinking through in terms of the cybersecurity, the security startups, everyone. I mean, the companies who are into that, the larger companies who have defined and redefining the way in which things are happening, digital transformation, all of that put together, if it is being pushed in the right direction, I think the future is ours to hold. And that's why we shouldn't be worried about what's happening around us right now.
Sure.
And we shouldn't have a myopic view, but is it in the right direction in the next 5 years? If you ask me personally, we are on the right track as an economy and together as a partnership. And that gives a lot of hope.
That actually raises an interesting point, because now with your pulse on the regulatory system, right, and you were in the sandbox, you're sort of understanding at a very deep level what the priorities of the regulators are and maybe even the government. Are there particular areas for all the founders listening in who are in fintech or allied industries? Where is the government sort of pushing on? Where is the urgency? Are they trying to create innovation in specific areas? Are there white spaces that they're pushing for? Do you have any insight on that?
Arvind, in my opinion, the way it is going is, right from making a complete digital footprint is a fundamental part of it. And through the way, each of the regulations, as I mentioned, the particular regulation on whether it is fintechs earlier, what has been given to them, like whether it is on the card side, whether it's on probably on the lending side, the tightening that has happened, all of this has happened as a byproduct of some of the issues or exploitation which has happened in the current form and shape. You can't say it will be there to stay forever. Those models, if it worked and if it is a convenience which has been at the core of it, would come back. Probably, it is for a short term, there would be a fundamental issue why each of these, if you look at it, there has been particular instances, particular issues which led to this, which caused, though we say as knee-jerk reaction, it is not knee-jerk, it has been in the system. The red flags were being raised, discussions were being made, or rather, the regulator never wakes up one day and come up with something. I've never seen that. So if you have your eyes and ears close to the reality, you'll always see the noise, you'll always see the red flags being raised, and then only these kind of issues happen. So it could be right from concerns on on the money laundering part of it, to cybersecurity part of it, to data theft part of it, to there are so many fundamental issues which could literally have a very high risk on the way economy is operating, and that's why some of these are coming into picture. But overall, it's all about, can we embrace innovation, think futuristically, and connect all of these different pieces together. So that's what, if you look at it, we usually say that NPCI is the biggest fintech startup in India, right? I mean, there is nothing that they haven't touched and they haven't done. So now with the interoperable net banking, whether it's BBPS 2.0, wherein you just don't have the problem of any kind of reconciliation from one AI, whether it is one ERP to the other ERP, whichever they are interacting, the bill goes and sits there and you can make the payment from there itself, touching or not touching the bank account. So you have various options through which you can do. And imagine, how lending can be fitted in there. I mean, right at the transaction level, you can underwrite. Between these, this is where, whether it is AI, whether it is, technology of scoring mechanisms, that's where credit becomes extremely inclusive credit, because you can literally see what has been the history of transactions. At the transaction level, you can look at it and underwrite, because you know who are there on both sides. You know what has been their history and what is this transaction all about. So all of these put together, if you see, and then ONDZ. It's very interesting to see how GST, ONDZ, different parts of the payments, everything, if you look at it, the entire commerce and even open banking is getting very, very high visibility, as well as a push from the government itself, especially with the interoperable net banking is nothing but that, right? So all put together, all of this coming together, it's going to be a game changer. And that's how the regulator, the way in which it is being done is, we will make all the stack and write regulation. You solve for the problems and figure out how this can be taken to the customers in terms of each of the problem solving, like each of the issues they are facing, pick up issues. I mean, right now we keep talking about even Gen AI in vertical part, right? Vertical, each of the vertical, how does it solve for? Exactly the same the government is also. I'll build the whole stack. You figure out how it can solve for each of these issues. You pick up the problems and solve for.
Amazing.
So instead of looking at, oh my God, this is a disruption, we should be looking at, yes, they have done 3/4 of the job. Why don't we just focus more and more on, like the way we have been doing for the entrepreneurs? You focus on more and more on, if you have the truth of cash flow being there, just decide, figure out what to do, and then move ahead, right? I mean, from here itself, we can do everything. It's like that. I mean, as founders, we should look at it in terms of as an opportunity, because we don't have to slog for the number of years we take to take a new product to the market will be crashed significantly where we stand, right? We just have to think through in terms of how we can fundamentally solve the problem that the customer is facing. And each segment will have a unique problem, and find the problem and figure out the easiest way in which you can make them adopt.
I really like that. I'm going to bring that answer. I mean, I want to just squeeze out a little information there. If you could, so all these trends, there's technology, there's consumer behavior, there's macro trends and everything else. If I could ask you, this will be the last question that we move on to rapid fire. We have a rapid fire round after that. But if you could, if I could ask you for 3 things that you are looking forward to that are coming your way, either trends or changes that you're seeing in behavior or anything else that you're looking forward to, and then 3 things that you hope will happen to actually help the ecosystem at large. It could be open, it could be the financial ecosystem, or it could be the startup ecosystem at large. What would you say? We can start with the 3 changes that you're looking forward to.
I would say one huge change that I see is Gen AI. It's going to disrupt the way in which we live, even our own day-to-day life. Forget about just fintech, right? Fintech, it's going to be. So that itself will have a huge bearing on the consumer behavior. And this is not, I'm not talking about, I mean, what we are seeing around us today is just the beginning of it. So another couple of years, this will look very different, including the people who are like a consumer behavior. Particularly, it will start with the consumer part of it, and before it comes in a big way on the business part of it. So that's one thing that I feel it will be a game changer. Second, in Indian fintech, if I were to touch upon the fintech part of it, right? NPCI itself, or rather the regulator and the government, is going to play a huge role, paving the way for most of the things that we are thinking through right now. Some of the models would look like as if it is disrupted forever. So we need to rethink, especially on fintech as startups, we need to rethink the way in which we're going to solve for customer problems. Sometimes what we spend building for years together could look like it's just available to everyone. So in that case, what are you going to, which exact part is your USP and where are you going to innovate on? So I think it will push innovation quite a bit. And the last and final aspect is there is a huge untapped market out there. And that white space, understand the pulse of it, because the other part, there are so many players already. There's so many players who are trying to solve for it. Understand the pulse of what the other side is, and as a balanced long-term aspect, keep working on it.
Sure.
So these are the three things I would say as a trend we should keep in mind.
Sure.
And
what you're hoping for, if you had to, there was a genie that would give you 3 wishes, what would you hope would happen in the ecosystem?
First of all, I don't believe in anything very quick.
Okay.
I would never ask a genie. I would rather experience that, go through all the struggle, and then figure out, oh my God, yeah, I think I messed up.
Again, very clearly a founder. It's amazing. Okay, great. Okay, we can actually jump to the rapid fire round. So it's 5 questions, whatever comes to mind by asking all the guests. First one is a startup other than Open that inspires you in India.
Blinkit does.
Blinkit?
Yes.
What's the one thing you wish you had known before you started Open?
That the journey is going to be very, very, very hard.
If you had to describe the future of India's next decade in one word, what would it be?
Awesome.
One book or podcast that has shaped your entrepreneurial journey that you could recommend?
Jonathan Livingston Seagull. It's a very simple, small book, but whenever I'm in doubt, that's one thing I go back to.
A tool or app that you can't live without in your daily workflow?
Same, Blinkit.
Blinkit.
Personal. Otherwise, it's open.
Otherwise, it's open. That's a great
Being
answer.
a CFO, being the founder, of course, every day you can.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Deena. This was such a interesting, I think we went into, this might have been one of the most holistic overviews of one of these industries. Thank you so much for taking the time. I really enjoyed this conversation. I hope you had a good time too.
Thank you, Arvind. Definitely. It was a pleasure talking about the sector we are in, and one of the most dynamic sectors.
Amazing.
Looking forward to a great India. Thank you. I'm sitting here right in WeWork Prestige Tech Park. Had a great, amazing conversation. Arvind, you've been incredible, great questions, and I just had an opportunity of literally introspecting and looking at what exactly am I doing, what exactly am I solving for, and what does the future look like. So it has been great, incredible work. We work particularly in terms of, on the Upstart side, particularly in terms of curating the sessions. Right from the beginning, I've been looking at it and curating the sessions, dovetailing it to how India is getting, shaping up for the next few decades, and what are the great things which are happening in the economy. Thank you so much for having me here, and keep up the great work. We all are getting benefited out of the different varied conversations you are bringing on to the podcast. Thank you.